3 little girls were found sleeping in janitor uniforms on a CEO's lobby couch. He had no idea they'd change his life forever. Ryan Brooks arrived at his office building just after sunrise, as he always did. The city was still waking up, yellow cabs sped past in steady rhythm, steam curled from manhole covers, and a few early risers walked briskly to their destinations, clutching coffee cups and phone calls. Dressed in a light gray suit that was tailored to perfection, Ryan stepped out of the sleek black car that dropped him off each morning. He adjusted his watch, took a sip from his coffee, and entered the towering glass and steel building that bore the name of his company in silver letters near the door. He was already thinking about his first meeting. A product launch. Investors. Deadlines. His tablet glowed with the schedule as he stepped into the lobby. The marble floors gleamed, and soft instrumental music played overhead. Everything about this place was sharp, modern, efficient, just like Ryan himself. But what he saw next stopped him cold. On the sleek white couch near the reception desk, 3 small children were sleeping. Not ordinary children dressed for school or with a nanny nearby, these were little girls, no more than 6 years old, wearing janitor uniforms. Each of them had on a blue jumpsuit over a white t-shirt, and their hands were still covered in slightly oversized yellow rubber gloves. Their brown hair was neatly braided, and they were curled up close to one another, as if huddling for warmth. One had her arm wrapped protectively around a cleaning bucket as if it were a stuffed toy. Ryan blinked, unsure if he was seeing it right. At first, he assumed someone had made a terrible mistake. Maybe someone's children had come to work with their parent and fallen asleep. But these girls were too still, too quiet, and far too young to be in this place alone. Something about the sight struck him deep in the chest, cutting through the usual steel of his morning routine. He walked slowly toward them, careful not to startle them. One of the girls stirred slightly, turning her head into the arm of the couch. The other 2 remained fast asleep, their small bodies rising and falling with soft, even breaths. He knelt down quietly beside the couch and gently reached out to touch the arm of the girl who had moved. She blinked awake slowly, her big brown eyes meeting his with both confusion and fatigue. "Hey," Ryan said softly, "it's okay. You're safe. Why are you here?" The girl sat up a little, blinking again. She looked at her sisters, then back at him. Her voice came out no louder than a whisper. "Mom is in the ICU. We don't have a home." Those words hit him like a punch to the stomach. He felt all the air leave his body in one silent exhale. He looked at her again, really looked at her. She wasn't scared. She wasn't crying. She looked resigned. Like she was used to not being okay. Like she had said that sentence 100 times in her head already. He took a breath and reached for her hands, gently pulling off the gloves. Her fingers were small and red from cleaning supplies. She didn't resist. Her sisters began to stir beside her, rubbing their eyes as they slowly woke up. He stood up, looked around the lobby, and realized no one else had noticed. No one had asked. These girls were invisible to everyone else, but not to him. He bent down again and said, "You're not going to work anymore. Not today. Not ever again. Come with me. Let's get you something warm to eat." And just like that, Ryan Brooks, the man who thought he had no room for anything beyond numbers and power, forgot every meeting, every call, every plan. Because 3 little girls in janitor uniforms were sleeping on his lobby couch, and something in him refused to walk past them. Ryan led the girls out of the lobby into the quiet morning streets of Manhattan, unsure of what he was doing but more certain than ever that he couldn't leave them behind. The smallest of them, Sophie, he would learn later, held tightly to his hand, while the other 2, Lucy and Hannah, walked beside them, silent but obedient. It was clear they were used to following instructions without question. He saw it in the way they moved, cautious, alert, but not afraid of him. Just unsure. Like they didn't know if this kindness was real or temporary. He brought them to a nearby 24-hour diner, the kind with red vinyl booths and a waitress who didn't blink twice at a man in a suit bringing in 3 girls in janitor overalls. They slid into a booth, and he ordered pancakes, eggs, hot chocolate, and fruit, too much food for such tiny children, but he didn't care. He just wanted them to eat, to feel full, to feel like kids again, even if just for an hour. As the plates arrived, he watched the girls dig in cautiously at first, then with more confidence, then with something close to joy. Their cheeks flushed from the warmth and sugar, their eyes lit up in a way that made Ryan feel something inside him crack. It had been years since he felt anything other than drive or pressure. He had lived in a world of targets, goals, and profit margins. But these girls weren't numbers. They weren't checkboxes. They were lives, young, fragile, and left without anyone to carry them through a world that didn't care they even existed. He finally asked their names. Lucy, the one who seemed like the oldest, spoke first. She was serious, steady-eyed, the kind of child who had been forced to grow up too fast. She explained that their mother, Maria, had collapsed while working late at a hotel a week ago. An ambulance had taken her, and the girls had stayed with the building's janitor for a night before returning to the only place they remembered, her last workplace before the hotel. This building. Ryan's building. Sophie, the quiet one, barely said a word but never let go of her plastic fork. Hannah, more sensitive, whispered that they had been cleaning floors at night so no one would see them. They hadn't eaten properly in days. They slept in a janitor's closet when they couldn't stay on the couch. No one had noticed. No one had cared. Ryan tried to stay calm as he listened, but his jaw clenched with every word. What kind of world allowed this? He asked them gently about their father, hoping there was someone else who could help. But the answer was another blow. He had left before Sophie was even born. Maria had raised them alone, working 2 jobs, and doing her best to give them everything with nothing. The girls didn't even remember his name. After breakfast, Ryan took them shopping. At first, they didn't understand what was happening. When he brought them to a large children's clothing store, they looked around as if they had entered another planet. Lucy kept asking if they were allowed to try things on. Sophie held tightly to her old clothes even as the sales associate offered her new ones. Ryan knelt beside them and said softly, "Everything here is for you. Pick what you like. As much as you need." They hesitated at first, but as the piles of clean, colorful clothes grew, something in their posture shifted. They stopped looking over their shoulders. They started smiling. He didn't stop there. They picked out new shoes, warm coats, soft pajamas. When they passed a toy store, he asked them to choose one thing each. Lucy chose a book. Hannah chose a stuffed rabbit. Sophie couldn't decide and eventually just grabbed his hand instead. It nearly brought him to tears. By late afternoon, Ryan had checked them into a quiet hotel suite with 2 bedrooms and a small kitchen. The girls had never seen a bathtub so big or bed so soft. He ordered dinner for them, mac and cheese, chicken tenders, juice, and stayed until they were bathed, dressed, and tucked into bed. He didn't leave until they had all fallen asleep, huddled close to one another under the blankets. When he returned home that night, he sat on the edge of his leather couch in his silent, gleaming apartment with the skyline stretching outside the window. He didn't touch his phone. He didn't turn on the news. He just sat there, remembering the weight of Sophie's hand in his, Lucy's protective glances, Hannah's soft laugh. His world, so pristine, so perfectly arranged, suddenly felt cold and meaningless. For the first time in years, Ryan didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a man who had stumbled into something far greater than any company or portfolio. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a roadmap. All he had were 3 little girls who needed someone, and a quiet, growing certainty that maybe, somehow, they were about to save each other. The next morning, Ryan arrived at the hotel earlier than planned. He had barely slept, his mind turning over every possibility, every risk, every question that had no easy answer. But one truth kept cutting through the noise: those girls had no one else, and he couldn't walk away. He brought breakfast from a nearby bakery, fresh croissants, scrambled eggs, berries, and orange juice. When he entered the suite with the key card the hotel manager had prepared for him, he found the girls already awake. Lucy was helping Sophie get dressed, carefully tying the straps of her overalls, while Hannah brushed her sister's hair with slow, gentle strokes. They stopped when they saw him, and for a brief moment, there was that flicker of uncertainty in their eyes again, the kind that only came from living too long in instability. But when he smiled and lifted the bakery bag in the air, they ran toward him. They ate breakfast together at the small round table by the window, and Ryan listened while the girls told him about the books they liked, their favorite colors, and the pets they'd always wanted. It was the kind of conversation most adults overlooked, but to Ryan, it was a reminder of everything they'd missed, everything they still deserved. He realized quickly that Lucy, despite being only 6, had taken on the role of a caretaker. She watched her sisters constantly, answered most questions first, and always waited for their reactions before showing her own feelings. Hannah was sensitive, prone to sudden silence when overwhelmed, but had a natural creativity that poured out when given crayons and paper. Sophie rarely spoke, but when she did, it was always honest and full of quiet wisdom that belied her age. Later that morning, Ryan called his assistant and asked for all the information she could find about Maria Carter. He gave her the name, the hospital, and what little background he knew. He requested full discretion. He didn't want headlines or gossip, he wanted the truth. While waiting, he took the girls back out into the city, this time to Central Park. He bought them bubbles, rented bikes with training wheels, and sat with them under the trees while they built tiny castles out of leaves and twigs. For the first time, they laughed freely. Not nervously, not politely, just as children should. People passed by, some watching curiously as this man in a tailored coat sat cross-legged in the grass among 3 small girls, blowing soap bubbles and letting them pop on his face. Ryan didn't care what anyone thought. He felt more himself in those moments than he had in years. By the afternoon, he got the update from his assistant. Maria had worked janitorial shifts in several buildings, including his, for the past year. Her records were spotless. No complaints, no issues. Single mother, no listed relatives. The hospital confirmed she was still in critical condition but no longer sedated. Ryan asked for permission to visit her and was told visiting hours were restricted, but special arrangements could be made. He didn't wait. At the hospital, the girls remained in the car with his driver, watching cartoons on a tablet he'd given them. He entered the ICU alone. Maria lay in a white hospital bed, pale and still, an oxygen tube running across her face, machines beeping steadily beside her. Her face was thinner than in the photo attached to her employee file, but she was beautiful in a quiet, unassuming way. He stood by her bedside for a long time before speaking. Finally, he said, "Your daughters are safe. They're okay. I promise I'm taking care of them." She didn't move, didn't open her eyes, but something about saying the words aloud made them feel more real. He sat down in the chair beside her and stayed there, just watching her breathe, for almost an hour. When he returned to the car, Lucy asked if he had seen their mom. Ryan nodded and told them the truth, that she was still sleeping, but she was strong, and the doctors were helping her. Hannah asked if they could visit. He promised that when their mother was awake, they would. That seemed to comfort them. That night, Ryan didn't return to his own apartment. He stayed in the suite's guest room, setting an alarm to check on the girls every few hours. At around midnight, he found Sophie curled up on the couch with a blanket, whispering to her stuffed rabbit. She looked up at him and asked, "Are you going to leave tomorrow?" He knelt beside her, met her eyes, and said, "No. I'm not leaving. Not tomorrow. Not ever, if you want me to stay." She nodded, lay back down, and fell asleep within minutes. In the stillness of that moment, Ryan knew something had shifted permanently. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't just charity or obligation. He had become part of their lives, and somehow, they had become part of his. He couldn't yet explain the why or how of it, but he didn't need to. He only knew he would fight for them, with everything he had. 2 days later, Ryan sat once again in the ICU waiting room, this time with a bouquet of soft yellow tulips resting awkwardly on his lap. The nurse had just informed him that Maria Carter was finally conscious, though still weak and under close observation. His heart beat with an unfamiliar nervousness as he waited to be allowed in. He had delivered a dozen boardroom speeches in front of Fortune 500 executives, negotiated billion-dollar mergers, and handled high-stakes interviews with a perfectly calm demeanor, but this was different. This was personal. And that terrified him. When the nurse finally opened the door, Ryan rose and entered quietly. Maria lay propped up slightly, her eyes half open, her skin still pale, but her gaze was focused. She turned her head slowly as he stepped into the room. There was no recognition in her expression, only wariness. She didn't know him. Of course she didn't. He approached slowly, stopping just at the edge of her bed. "Maria. I'm Ryan Brooks," he said gently. "You don't know me, but your daughters, they've been staying with me the past few days. They're safe. They're okay." Her brow furrowed slightly. She looked confused and tried to speak, but her voice was nothing more than a rasp. He moved quickly to pour her a cup of water and helped her lift it to her lips. After a few sips, she nodded in thanks and finally managed a whisper. "The girls, where are they?" "They're fine. They're at a hotel not far from here, with a nanny I hired to look after them while I came to visit. They've had food, baths, clean beds, clothes. And they've been asking about you constantly." He paused, unsure of how much to say. "They're incredibly strong. They never stopped hoping you'd get better." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. Her voice was faint, but steady. "You said, you don't know me. So why?" "I found them asleep in the lobby of my office building," he said softly, meeting her eyes. "They were wearing janitor uniforms. I didn't know what was going on, until I spoke to one of them. She told me you were in the hospital and they had nowhere to go. I couldn't leave them there." Maria closed her eyes for a long moment, her lips trembling. When she finally looked at him again, there was something fragile and heavy in her expression. "I thought, no one would notice. I didn't think anyone would care." "I noticed," Ryan said quietly. "And I care." There was silence between them after that. Not cold silence, just the kind that comes when neither party knows what to say next. Ryan remained seated, giving her time, watching the steady rhythm of the monitors. He felt like he was witnessing the slow reassembly of a life that had almost been lost. Over the next few days, he visited again and again. Maria grew stronger, speaking more clearly each time. He told her more about the girls, how Lucy helped make breakfast, how Sophie barely let her rabbit out of her sight, how Hannah had already filled a notebook with doodles. Maria listened as if clinging to every detail. When Ryan offered to bring them to see her, she hesitated. "Not yet," she said. "Let them stay in that world a little longer. A world where they don't have to worry." But the girls were beginning to worry more each day. Lucy had started pacing at night, asking questions Ryan couldn't answer. Sophie had withdrawn, sometimes curling up and staying silent for hours. Hannah grew restless, wanting to see her mother but too afraid to ask. Finally, Maria relented. Ryan brought them to the hospital early one morning. The girls entered the room in silence, unsure at first. Maria reached out her arms, and all three of them ran to her, clinging so tightly that the heart monitor jumped. Tears came freely now, from all four of them. Ryan stepped back and let the moment unfold without interruption. He watched as Maria kissed their heads, whispered apologies, and held them with a kind of desperation only a mother who nearly lost everything could feel. Afterward, Maria looked over the heads of her daughters at Ryan. "Thank you," she said softly. "You kept them safe." "I just did what I had to do," he said, but he knew it wasn't true. He had done what he wanted to do. What his heart had insisted on doing from the moment he saw those girls asleep in the lobby. Something had pulled him in, and now it felt less like a rescue and more like a calling. Later, Maria and Ryan talked alone for the first time in a more open way. She told him about her struggles, how she'd worked 2 jobs since her youngest was born, how she had no family left to lean on, how every dollar was stretched until it broke. She didn't want pity. She didn't cry as she spoke. She just told the truth of her life, stripped of pride or shame. Ryan listened with a reverence he hadn't known he was capable of. "I've always done it all on my own," she said. "Even when it nearly killed me." "I know," he replied. "But you're not alone anymore." Maria didn't respond right away. She stared out the window, her hand resting on the hospital blanket. "That's a hard thing to believe." "I understand. So I'll keep proving it until you do." And in that moment, something shifted, not just in Maria, but in both of them. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something more primal than that. Trust beginning to form. 2 people from completely different worlds learning how to hold the same fragile thread of hope. Outside the hospital, the world carried on. But inside, in that quiet, sterile room, something new was beginning, something that neither of them had expected, but both silently knew might be the beginning of everything. By the end of the 3rd week, Maria had been moved out of the ICU and into a recovery room with a window that overlooked a small garden. The girls visited her every day after school, bringing with them little drawings, homemade cards, and updates about their adventures with Ryan. Lucy liked to report everything like a miniature adult: what they had for breakfast, how the nanny folded their laundry differently, how Hannah had learned to ride a bike without training wheels. Hannah, of course, immediately demonstrated with exaggerated hand gestures and sound effects. Sophie mostly sat on the edge of the bed, her hand in Maria's, watching her mother quietly as though memorizing every new color returning to her face. Maria's strength was returning, but so was her restlessness. She had always been in motion, working, managing, surviving, and now, confined to a hospital bed, she felt like her life was being lived without her. She appreciated everything Ryan had done. She told him that often, though sometimes in ways that sounded guarded. She was grateful, yes, but there was always a distance in her tone, like a person afraid to accept too much from a world that had taught her not to expect kindness without consequences. Ryan noticed it, but he didn't push. He showed up every day, sometimes with a new book for the girls, sometimes with fresh fruit or pastries for Maria. They began to speak more openly, sharing stories of their pasts in quiet fragments, his distant parents, her teenage years in foster care, how both of them had learned to survive without expecting anyone else to stay. There were no romantic words between them, no declarations. But something unspoken had begun to grow, something fragile and mutual and deeply human. One afternoon, after a visit, Maria pulled Ryan aside before he could leave the room. The girls were already halfway down the hallway with the nurse. Maria's voice was steady but serious. "I need to know what your intentions are." He met her eyes without hesitation. "With the girls?" "With all of this," she said. "With me. With them. This is their life. I can't let them get attached to someone who's going to disappear when things get complicated." Ryan took a slow breath. He had expected this conversation eventually, but not yet. Still, he understood. More than she probably realized. "I didn't plan for any of this," he said. "I didn't wake up thinking I'd become a father figure overnight. But I'm not here out of guilt or pity. I'm here because they matter. Because you matter. And I'm not walking away." Maria studied his face. Her eyes were sharp, searching for any cracks, any signs of hesitation. But she didn't find any. He stood there like a man who had already decided. And in her heart, she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to believe: he wasn't trying to save them. He was choosing to stay. Later that week, Ryan brought the girls to see an apartment building. It wasn't his penthouse or anything extravagant. It was a warm, welcoming space on the Upper West Side, with 3 bedrooms, big windows, and a view of the river. He crouched in front of them as they explored the empty rooms and asked, "What do you think? Do you think your mom would like it here?" Lucy gasped when she saw the bookshelf built into the living room wall. Hannah opened every cabinet in the kitchen like it was an adventure. Sophie pressed her face to the window and whispered, "It's pretty." Ryan smiled. "I was thinking, maybe when your mom gets out of the hospital, we could all live here together. If she wants to, I mean." The girls didn't jump or cheer. They just looked at him. It was Lucy who spoke first, her voice small but direct. "Does that mean you're going to be our dad?" Ryan felt something catch in his throat. He had no rehearsed answer, no neat reply. So he told them the truth. "I don't know what I'm supposed to be. But I know I want to be here. Every day. For all of it. If that's something you want too." Hannah ran over and hugged him around the waist. Sophie followed. Lucy stood for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. That night, Ryan sat in the empty apartment, looking out at the city lights. He thought about the man he used to be, the man who had measured his worth by contracts, meetings, and dollar signs. That man wouldn't have known what to do with 3 little girls who needed bedtime stories more than business plans. But this version of himself, the one who had been shaped by tiny hands, late-night fears, and quiet courage, he didn't want to go back. He wanted to build something lasting. Something real. He didn't know what the future would bring. There were still court documents to file, decisions to be made, boundaries to navigate with Maria. But for the first time in years, his purpose was no longer abstract. It was made of laughter in a park, crayon drawings on fridge doors, and 3 little voices calling him by name. And that was enough for him to keep going. Maria was released from the hospital on a cool, breezy afternoon. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the skyline, casting warm gold light across the pavement as Ryan helped her into the car. Her body was still fragile, her steps slow, but there was strength behind her every movement now, a determination she wore like armor. The girls were waiting at the apartment when they arrived, pacing by the door with nervous energy and wide eyes. The moment the door opened, all 3 of them rushed forward, arms wrapping around their mother before she'd even stepped inside fully. Maria laughed, tears slipping down her cheeks, as she held them close. The apartment was everything she'd never dared to hope for, clean, filled with natural light, and quiet in the kind of way that made you feel like you could finally breathe. There was a bedroom for each of the girls, decorated with small touches Ryan had chosen with their help. Hannah's had a wall of doodles framed like artwork, Lucy's was lined with bookshelves already half full, and Sophie's had soft string lights above her bed and a rabbit-themed blanket she refused to part with. Maria's room was simple, elegant, and private. She hadn't had a room to herself in nearly a decade. The moment she stepped inside, she turned slowly and looked at Ryan with something unreadable in her eyes. "This is too much," she said quietly. "It's exactly what you and the girls deserve," he answered. That night was the first time they had dinner together as a family. Ryan cooked, badly. The pasta was overcooked, the sauce slightly burned, but the girls ate like it was the best thing in the world. Maria watched from across the table, her face soft, her hands folded, as the chaos of their laughter filled the room. At one point, Sophie spilled her juice and looked horrified, whispering an apology as if bracing for punishment. But Ryan just handed her a napkin and cleaned it up with a smile. "It's just juice," he said. The girls glanced at Maria, unsure, and she nodded. "It's just juice," she echoed. After the girls were asleep, Maria and Ryan stood on the small balcony overlooking the river. The city shimmered below them, but it was quiet up there. They didn't speak for a long while. She leaned against the railing, arms crossed against the wind. He watched her from the corner of his eye, knowing there were words she hadn't said yet. "You've changed everything," she said finally. Ryan turned toward her. "You've done all the hard parts. I just caught you after the fall." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You gave us space to rest. That's what we never had before. We've been running and hiding and surviving for so long, we forgot how to just be." He nodded, understanding too well the exhaustion she described. "You don't have to run anymore. You're safe here. The following week settled into a rhythm none of them had expected. Mornings were busy with backpacks, braids, spilled cereal, and rushed goodbye kisses. Ryan would leave for work after walking the girls to school, and Maria, though still recovering, began to manage the apartment, take long walks, and eventually accepted a part-time position as a front desk assistant at one of Ryan's other buildings. He hadn't offered it as charity. He knew she needed purpose, and she took it seriously. He respected that more than she realized. In the evenings, they shared simple routines: dinner, homework, stories. The apartment filled with noise, and yet, it never felt chaotic. It felt alive. Ryan started coming home earlier. Meetings could wait. Profits could wait. He began to measure success by different things now: the way Sophie's drawing started including him, the way Lucy corrected him on bedtime story details, the way Hannah had begun calling him Dad when she thought he wasn't listening. One night, after the girls had gone to bed, Maria and Ryan sat on the couch, a blanket shared between them. She had fallen asleep against his shoulder, her breath slow and steady, and he hadn't moved for almost an hour. He didn't want to wake her. In that stillness, he realized that whatever had begun between them was no longer uncertain. It wasn't about obligation or circumstance. It was about belonging. He thought about what it would mean to ask her for more. To make this something permanent. But he knew better than to rush. She needed time. They all did. Still, in the warmth of that moment, with the sound of children sleeping down the hall and the weight of her head resting gently against him, he let himself imagine a future that wasn't filled with loneliness, but with love. And for the first time in years, that future didn't feel like a risk. It felt like home. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the idea first came to him. Ryan was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in his hands while Sophie colored beside him, her brow furrowed in concentration. The apartment smelled of vanilla waffles and syrup, and the sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, making the whole place feel like a memory already being made. Maria was still in bed, catching a rare extra hour of sleep, and the girls had let her rest without protest. Ryan watched Sophie lean over her paper and carefully write out the words, "My family," in block letters above her drawing of 5 stick figures, 3 girls, a woman, and a man with messy brown hair and a crooked smile. His chest tightened. Later that day, he found Maria folding laundry in the bedroom. She was humming under her breath, something soft and familiar, and the calm on her face reminded him of how far they had come. She didn't jump when he entered the room, didn't tense like she once had. She simply looked up, smiled faintly, and kept folding. That trust was its own kind of miracle. "I've been thinking," he said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. Oh," she teased. "Should I be worried?" "Maybe a little," he replied, smiling, but then his expression sobered. "Not about anything bad. I wanted to ask if you've ever thought about what comes next." Maria paused, her hands resting on a folded towel. "What do you mean?" "I mean the future. You, me, the girls. We've built something real here. Something that feels more like family than anything I've ever known. And I want to keep building it. With you." She sat down slowly beside him, turning to face him. Her eyes were careful but not closed. "I think about it every day," she said quietly. "But I don't know what we are yet. I don't want to rush something just because it feels easy now." "I'm not asking for answers today," Ryan said. "But I'm not going anywhere. I love the girls. I care about you. And I want to be here. For everything." Maria nodded slowly, her expression unreadable at first, then warming. "I believe you," she said, and though those 3 words seemed simple, he knew they came from somewhere deep and hard-earned. In the days that followed, things didn't change dramatically, but there was a new closeness between them. They started finishing each other's sentences. Maria called him at work to ask if he wanted something specific for dinner. He surprised her by showing up at her building with flowers just because it was Tuesday. The girls began including him in every plan, every story, every joke. Sophie now climbed into his lap without hesitation. Lucy began to ask him for help with schoolwork. Hannah whispered, "Good night, Daddy," at the door before bed, pretending it was a game, but never taking it back when he said it back. One afternoon, while the girls were at a sleepover, Maria and Ryan went walking by the river. It was cold, but they didn't mind. They shared a scarf between them and walked in sync without needing to speak. After a long silence, Maria said, "I always thought love would come with fireworks or something big and dramatic. But this, it's quiet. It's patient. That's the kind that lasts," Ryan said. "The kind that stays." She looked at him, then reached for his hand. "You stayed. Even when you had every reason not to." "I stayed because I finally found something worth staying for." She smiled, and he realized she didn't just hear him, she believed him now in a way she hadn't before. Her walls were coming down not in a collapse, but like snow melting slowly under warmth. A week later, Ryan came home early to find the girls sitting at the kitchen table, working on something with scissors and glue. When he asked what they were doing, Lucy proudly held up a large sheet of paper with the words, "Our Forever Family," written across the top in glittery letters. Around it were photos they had printed, pictures of dinners, walks in the park, messy hair mornings, story times, and birthday cupcakes. "We're going to hang it in the living room," Hannah said. "Do you think Mommy will like it?" Sophie asked, climbing into his arms. Ryan didn't answer right away. He just nodded and held her close. That night, after dinner, Maria found the poster hung above the bookshelf. She stood there looking at it for a long time before turning around. Ryan was in the kitchen washing dishes. She walked over, dried her hands on a towel, and whispered, "Maybe we are ready." He turned to her, still holding a dish. "Ready for what?" "For forever," she said. And that night, after the girls were asleep, and the city glowed quietly outside their windows, Maria and Ryan sat on the couch, side by side, and began talking about what forever would look like, for all five of them. The morning of the ceremony arrived with the kind of quiet that felt sacred. The sun broke over the rooftops in soft bands of golden light, spilling through the windows of their apartment and casting warmth across the hardwood floor. Maria stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, smoothing down the fabric of her light ivory dress. It wasn't extravagant, no diamonds, no veil, no glittering train. It was simple, elegant, chosen with care and a calm confidence that hadn't always been hers. Her reflection didn't lie, she looked tired, yes, but also whole. Strong. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with surviving what tried to break her. She adjusted the small chain around her neck, one with a tiny charm shaped like a heart that the girls had picked out for her the week before. Then she turned toward the door where Sophie stood watching, barefoot and wide-eyed, holding a bouquet of tiny white daisies. "Are you nervous?" Sophie whispered, as if saying it louder would somehow change the moment. Maria smiled and crouched down beside her. "No," she said truthfully. "I think I've never been more sure of anything in my life." In the living room, Hannah and Lucy were already dressed in matching lavender dresses, their hair curled with little pins and flowers tucked gently into the braids Maria had woven for them the night before. Ryan stood near the window, adjusting his sleeves, his dark gray suit sharp against the soft morning light. When he turned around and saw Maria walk into the room, everything else, the room, the day, the details, seemed to fall away. There was only her. And them. And this moment they had built with patience and grace and time. The ceremony was held in a small garden behind a library downtown, a space enclosed with ivy-covered walls and blooming spring flowers. There were no crowds, no press, no extravagance, just a handful of people who mattered. The girls carried flowers down the stone path before Maria walked toward Ryan, her step steady, her eyes never leaving his. The officiant, a friend from one of the local community centers, kept it short and heartfelt. There were no rehearsed vows. Ryan simply took Maria's hands and told her he loved her, not because he had to, but because it had become the most natural thing he'd ever said. He promised not a perfect life, but a shared one. Maria, in turn, spoke softly of trust, of second chances, of how she had never thought her story would include this chapter but now couldn't imagine it ending any other way. After they exchanged simple gold rings, nothing flashy, just a circle of promise, Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out 3 smaller boxes. The girls stepped forward, curious, and he knelt down to their level. "I didn't just make promises to your mom today," he said. "I'm making them to you, too." He opened the boxes, revealing 3 delicate bracelets, each with a tiny charm that read their names on one side and the word always on the other. Lucy gasped and hugged him without hesitation. Hannah's eyes filled with tears as she whispered thank you. Sophie didn't say a word but held out her wrist quietly, her little fingers trembling with emotion. They weren't just part of the ceremony, they were the reason for it. This union wasn't a new beginning between 2 people. It was the sealing of a home that had already formed, room by room, moment by moment, since that first morning on the lobby couch. This was a confirmation of what they had already lived together: sleepless nights, laughter in the kitchen, scraped knees, report cards, healing silences, and the slow, careful rebuilding of trust. Later, as the sun dipped low and the garden filled with the soft sound of music and clinking glasses, Ryan watched Maria dancing barefoot with the girls, her laughter echoing through the air like something out of a memory he hadn't known he'd needed. He felt someone nudge his shoulder and turned to find Maria's nurse from the hospital, smiling warmly. "You did a good thing," she said. He nodded, his eyes never leaving his family. "They saved me," he answered. That night, after everyone had gone home, the apartment was filled with the remnants of celebration: flowers on counters, ribbon on the floor, half-eaten cake in the fridge. The girls were asleep, their bracelets still on, their dresses draped over chairs. Maria stood in the hallway, barefoot again, leaning against the doorframe. Ryan walked up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and pressed his chin to her shoulder. "Does it feel real now?" he asked. She smiled and leaned back into him. "It always was." They stood there for a long time, listening to the soft hum of the city, the breathing of children from down the hall, the steady quiet of a life finally settled. They didn't need to speak anymore. Everything important had already been said. This wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning of the part where peace finally found them. Where love wasn't a question, but an answer. Where family wasn't blood alone, but choice. And in that stillness, in the soft quiet of that final night in spring, every broken piece of the past was gently, beautifully replaced with something whole. The ending of this story is powerful in its softness. It doesn't rely on dramatic twists or grand gestures, but instead offers a deeply human and emotionally satisfying conclusion. What makes it beautiful is that the resolution comes through patience, quiet choices, and earned trust, not through rescue fantasies, but through the daily, often unglamorous work of showing up and staying. Ryan's transformation from a disconnected executive to a devoted father figure and partner feels not only believable, but necessary. His evolution isn't sudden, it unfolds through moments of doubt, learning, and compassion. He doesn't step in to fix Maria's life, he steps beside her and listens, learns, and supports. That distinction makes all the difference. Maria's strength is also portrayed with grace. She's not saved, she survives. She opens herself slowly, protects her daughters fiercely, and allows herself to be loved only after it's been consistently proven safe. Her character represents so many real women who endure silently and keep going, even when no one's watching. And the girls, Lucy, Hannah, and Sophie, carry the emotional heart of the story. Their resilience, innocence, and need for safety elevate every scene. They are not plot devices. They are real, textured characters whose love and trust ultimately shape everyone around them. The final chapter, where the family forms not just through love but through active choice, brings everything full circle. It's not just a happy ending, it's a justified one. And it reminds us that family isn't always something you're born into. Sometimes, it's something you build, patiently, painfully, and beautifully, together.